I'm Yolanda,
And I'm Katrina, and
and
we're
we're
straight
straight
from
from
the
the
streets.
streets.
Welcome, welcome. Today we're gonna have a very exciting episode. We're gonna talk to Gabi Madden,
Candidate.
a candidate challenging incumbent Sarah Hanna, and we're also gonna have Donna Schlachman, who is an advocate and for housing in Kingston, New York, and she's a community member. And we're very excited about this today. But before we get started, how you doing, Londa?
I'm doing great. How are you?
I'm hanging in there. I'm hanging in there,
I'm a little bit excited about today's episode.
Yeah, because our futures are in
Her hand.
hands, right?
That's
So, I mean, that's the only way to look at it. So, Gabby, we'd like to welcome you to the
Thank you.
show.
Thank you so much for having me. Excited to be here.
Donna.
I'm very excited to be here. As you well know, housing is a passion of mine.
Right, right. And it's also a passion of mine because I've been homeless. So, it's a scary situation that we're going through. I believe my partner here has been homeless.
Yes.
And we've both done homeless movies. Tell them a little bit about your movie first.
Mine
Londa.
was on Survival Media. That's with
Hudson
Shadia.
and Shadia.
Yeah, Shadia. And it was done maybe 4 years ago.
Yep, about, yeah.
Yeah, so
You
and it
know,
was really to go in the streets and to let everybody see all the stuff that we have to go through to get housing is like it's crazy. I'm not looking for housing. I can't say I'm not looking for housing. I'm looking for a better, bigger apartment. I have a studio right now. I need a 1 bedroom.
right.
So, but it's still an ongoing battle on and off for people in housing situations. And that's what we basically need to talk about today.
And that's what we're talking about. And my movie was a short film documentary done by the Woodstock Film Festival. And it was kind of amazing to have people walking around behind me with cameras and recorders and you know, even though I was hurting and I was going through it, I'm a firm believer, and even in the midst of the storm, God shows you rainbows and blessings. And
Yes, he
I
does.
was seeing some, and one of them is sitting over there because while I was homeless,
It's okay. It's
when I
okay.
became homeless, I didn't become homeless by myself. I became homeless with my partner of 20 plus years. We became homeless in February. Um, he turned 80 in March. He died in April, homeless for the first time in his life. And it's hard. It's really hard because we paid our rent during the whole pandemic. We didn't damage the property. We did what we were supposed to do, and we still ended up in the street. But I had somebody in my life that while I was grieving, they were looking for a roof over my head, and I'm forever grateful to her. And that's why we're here. That's why we do what we do. That's why this is real to us. This is our homes. My daughter was homeless for about 6 years.
Mhm.
And I had to move her to a whole nother place in Schenectady to be able to put her in a home with her children. So, Gabby, that's why we're here. And my first question to you is, what are your intentions, if elected,
Yeah.
to help with the housing crisis?
Yeah. Housing insecurity is a huge issue within our district, and we know that this is experienced statewide, but obviously my foremost priority is Ulster and Dutchess counties. And I know that, growing up in the city of Kingston, I've seen so much change over the years, and I've seen people really struggle to even find apartments, let alone actually be able to afford them. And so housing needs to be a number one priority, and we need to make sure that what we're rolling out as housing solutions are going to provide immediate relief. So as a state representative, you have to be able to juggle a lot at once. You have to be able to walk and chew gum. And so you want to be providing those immediate solutions so that you're assisting those constituents in real time to find stable, quality housing that is affordable while also looking towards those long-term sustainable goals of like, how are we going to improve this systematically to ensure that this does not happen in future generations, to ensure that our youth do not experience the same issues that we're experiencing as adults now. And so that's pretty much how I address anything that I'm legislating on, but especially these big items like housing that is so massive within this district is you have to make sure that you're prioritizing immediate relief. Take a step back, remember why you're introducing the legislation that you are, and it's to ensure that these individuals can, again, be assisted in real time right away. And so that's why, there's a lot of other solutions that are already on the table through housing and community renewal, even through legislation that was enacted in past years, like the Rent Stabilization and Tenant Protection Act from 2019. These are things that we already have those tools, but let's make sure that we're actually rolling them out as intended so that they're having the direct impact. That's why we introduced the laws, right? That's why they were enacted, so that we would have these solutions right on our table. And so right now I see that they're being not utilized to the fullest extent. And so that's disappointing to me. I want to make sure that other municipalities are doing these vacancy rate studies so that they can enact rent stabilization. I want to make sure that these tenants are aware of the protections they now have under the Tenant Protection Act and under good cause eviction. Starting in August of 2024, it's going to be required that landlords notify their tenants if they are covered under good cause eviction. But we have to make sure that our tenants know this, know their rights. And so hosting as many town halls and roundtables where you're out in your communities, totally available to them to inform them of what their rights are, what their resources are, and what legal avenues they have too. You folks had a young woman on the show not too long ago when you were talking about housing, and she detailed this horrendous issue that she had at Rondout Gardens. When I heard that, I literally sprung into action. That's why I have all these printouts, is because I wasn't sure if she would be here again. There's steps that can be taken to protect her and to make sure that she does not have to pay for the sofa that was ruined as a result of her landlord's negligence to respond to the insurance companies, for example. There are avenues that can be taken, but you need someone that's going to be an effective leader that's going to connect you to those resources and make sure that you're getting the assistance that you deserve and prioritized above that of the rest of New York State. That's my job.
I know you was
So-
raised in Kingston.
Donna has a question.
Oh,
Go
I'm
ahead,
sorry.
Donna.
I'm
Go
sorry,
ahead,
I just
Donna.
want to jump in right now. I'd like to backtrack later and introduce myself, but I just want to make it clear that Rondout Gardens, because it's under the Kingston Housing Authority, is not under the rent stabilization, nor is it under good cause.
Right.
So,
These current-
when
Mhm.
you say there are things that people can do right now, I think we need to be clear that the tenants in these places have been trying to do things for a long time.
Yeah.
We have a Kingston Housing Authority that has been negligent, and there's
For
been no
years.
accountability. And it's not because the tenants have been silent. It's not because they haven't gone to an attorney and actually asked for help. And when you talk about, the job of the government is to provide real-time relief, I've heard the same thing since I've moved to Kingston and since I've been introduced to the crisis that we have. There is no doubt that every elected official at every level of government cares about the fact that we're in a housing crisis. The problem is that there hasn't been the will to do it. Good cause, let's start with the rent stabilization guidelines. You mentioned it passed in 2019, and that people need to know that they can use it, except that the landlords took that rule to court and stopped it until it could go through the court process. And that was in 2022. So that's 3 years it wasn't going into effect. Went through the court finally. The court filed in favor of the rent stabilization guidelines that were introduced, and Kingston was on board with that and trying to implement it now. They're doing hearings now with the public. I think there were 2 hearings this past week. You may have gotten to one on Saturday. I didn't see you on the previous one. But the thing is that we have to decide, are we going to implement that law and reduce rents 15%, which is under the law? Are we going to implement that law and make sure that rents can only go up a certain percentage, and the guideline boards needs to set that percentage, and that's part of the process. But the fact is that the landlords are still going to the next level of court, even though this process is going on, to try to still stop that law. We talk about good cause eviction. That passed the state and the state budget under the governor, decimated. Yes, you won't be evicted because I think you can be evicted for not paying rent and for property destruction or doing something illegal in the apartment. But all those other things, protections for eviction, aren't in the law. And it's an opt-in law, which is why Sarah Hanna voted against the budget and the law, because it was going to pass. It's a Democratic House. There was no problem. But our own Common Council in Kingston, as well as other housing advocates, called her and asked her to vote against it because to make it clear that it's just not enough and the real protections aren't in it. So good cause is an opt-in. Kingston is now again going through the process of deciding not only is it going to opt in, but the one last minute thing that Sarah Hanna and her in collaboration with other people in the legislature got done was they got done that towns not only opt in, but they get to set the standard. So right now, units that are 10 units or less are exempt from this. And we're trying to get it. Yeah. Yeah. So if you're, look at Kingston. Kingston, I mean, the whole state is 50% rentals. But if you look at all the small rentals, a lot of them would not go under the good cause as passed by the governor. They are exempt from it. And the other thing the 10 things does is when there are property owners who own a lot of units, they can now do little separate LLCs so that all of them end up being an LLC with only 9 units, not the 30 some odd units that the person might own. So there's a lot of loopholes that were left in this bill that need to be addressed. And I think that's really important to point that out.
Wow.
Yeah.
And even with the Rent Stabilization and Tenant Protection Act, that's only applicable to units that were built before a certain time.
Exactly.
Again, like 6 units or
1974.
less. Yeah. So there's flaws there too.
Yes.
I would agree with you that
Yeah.
there's still gaps within
Yeah.
this legislation that was enacted.
Yeah.
And when I say tools on the table, not just referring to those 2 pieces of legislation, but what is available through housing and community renewal, what programs have worked for us here in the city of Kingston and Ulster and Dutchess previously that maybe the funding stopped and now we don't have those programs available anymore through HCR. The New York State Attorney General's office as well has a lot of resources for tenants that are, experiencing some of those bad practices of their landlords, like the young woman that was on your show not too long ago. That's a perfect example in which the AG's office, you can file a complaint and get a follow-up from the Attorney General specific to that tenant landlord issue. So I want to just make sure that I'm connecting constituents with those resources on a state level, but would agree that the legislation that was enacted was not tailored specifically to addressing the solutions right here in Ulster and Northern Dutchess.
And it would have left certain towns out of even being able to opt in. And that was another thing that was corrected at the last minute. Yolanda, I'm sorry, I stepped on something.
Oh, no. This is what we want. This is what we want right here. This is wonderful.
Okay.
But yeah, like if something comes and you want to, just, hey, y'all, this is what we do. So.
I know you was raised in Kingston, but my question is, how have you been involved in the community?
Yeah, so growing up, I was always in scouts. I was always doing volunteer cleanups, working at the food bank. That was the food bank of the Hudson Valley specifically, which services a lot of our area facilities here. The lifeguard for the city of Kingston growing up at Kingston Point and at the city of Kingston pool up here. Just always very involved with the community, doing projects at Kingston High with regard to our local AA and NA resources, just going around the community, visiting those different meetings. So I could experience it firsthand. I always had a lot of curiosity growing up because you're exposed to so much in the city of Kingston, which is awesome. I mean, that has benefited my perspective so much in this world. Going to college, I felt like I had so much more understanding and lived experience compared to that of my peers in college. And that was in New York City, where you think everyone has a lot of experience and exposure. And I realized not so much, and I had that opportunity growing up in the city of Kingston. So, always been engaged within my community. whether it was community events and volunteering for tabling, doing the menstrual product drives in high school. That was a big thing for us when we were going to KHS, was collecting tampons, pads, stuff like that for young girls. But any way that I can give back, that's I'm always looking for opportunities to do so.
So Gabby, that's really nice. That's great. Wish my kids had that kind of opportunity. So if you don't win this election, where will you dive into this community to do the kind of work
That's
you'd
a
like to see
really
it done?
great question. I honestly could not even answer that question.
Really?
I didn't think I was going to run for office. So this is the biggest risk I've ever taken in my life. I'm not one to take chances.
And you know what's crazy? This was the next question.
Yeah.
What made you decide to run?
Yeah, so it really started to feel like a responsibility to step up and really provide for my community. I've been working in the state legislature for about 6 years now as chief of staff and deputy chief of staff, and really understanding the ins and outs and the mechanics of state operations and the legislative process, something that I really love. And especially when I can bring it back home to my community and really deliver real results for the community that I was raised in. I mean, that's extremely rewarding. And so knowing that I had these tools, knowing I had the skill set and the passion for this work, and then seeing, what was taking place the past 2 years, which I saw as an absence in representation, whether it's tax dollars coming back home, really great quality constituent service work being provided, stakeholder roundtable meetings, dozens of meet and greets throughout the district where you're connecting directly with your constituency, bringing state agencies from Albany to come here to our community to speak directly with our residents, so that they have that lifeline, they have that extra touch point with these state entities, so that they're going to be prioritized going forward. That's where I saw there being an absence, and I knew that I was capable of doing this job and really performing very well for my constituents, and bringing a high level of a high standard of governance to our community. And I think that that's really what drove me to run. I was surprised, honestly, the end of 2023, that more individuals hadn't spoken of interest in running for this position. I had anticipated that, there were going to be more people interested in challenging, just seeing that absence of representation. And a lot of folks, that I spoke to just would reference the 2022 election and how ugly it got, and that it's not something that they wanted to take on. And so it just got to be a point where I was like, I feel a responsibility right now to really perform for my district, especially because I see this growth that's being experienced right now, which is great and has a lot of benefits, but it can also have a lot of unintended consequences if we're not making sure that the constituents that have been here in this community for their entire lives, some of them for generations of their families, if they can't stay here, and if we're not making sure that we're supporting them as we experience this growth in our population and this flux of wealth coming into the area, that's a big concern of mine. And so I felt like we were at a crucial point where we really need that effective leadership, that hands-on community approach. And so it, again, really just felt like a responsibility that I needed to step up and perform and do this for my community.
So it's interesting, having lived in a smaller state and been slightly involved with government and seeing how it operated, and moving back here, I thought, oh, it's such a big state, it's such a big community, it's going to take me forever to get to know people. And I have personally been in community forums and meetings with Sarah Hanna probably 5 times in the last year. So I'm not surprised that nobody stepped forward to primary her, because she's done an awesome job as far as a lot of us are concerned in terms of housing and looking ahead and looking presently and stuff. But I want to go back to this, just in terms of informing the public about some stuff that is going on, because I think we have an Ulster County legislature that now has, under the Health, Human Services and Housing Committee, a housing subcommittee that is really trying to figure out what we can do now to address, as you just said, Gabby, the people that have lived here for generations who are finding themselves fighting homelessness. One thing they did last year, which everybody knows, is is that the tax on hotels and short-term rentals, Airbnbs, was doubled. And that extra money is going into a housing, what's it called? Housing something fund. But anyway, it's a pot of money. They put out grants this year to look for innovative solutions to housing shortages. So the county is diving in. The governor's budget also had a similar thing where they were going to put in, was it $250 million? Gabby, you may
What
remember.
specifically, the ADUs?
No, not just for ADUs. That's a zoning thing that we also
She had a
passed,
1
but
billion
it was
investment.
to bring back to the communities emergency funding to
Wow.
keep people in their housing. Now, this housing subcommittee will have a resolution coming out of it this year, because I just spoke to the legislator who's sponsoring it, that is going to provide emergency money to prevent evictions. So it would be money that a landlord can get directly to cover that rent that's not coming in, so that that tenant never gets to eviction court. So your situation, Katrina, was different because it was an Airbnb. They were gonna boot you out no matter what, whether
Right.
the rent was coming or not. But
Right.
we know so many people who have been evicted because they're just short on their rent. And I sympathize, landlords can't be, bankers or whatever, but this is going to really be a game changer for something that's immediate, that impacts people. They're also looking to fund more advocacy. The Hudson Valley Legal Services is overwhelmed. You said you want to, constituents to know they can go to the AG. I'm sorry, you go to a big bureaucracy and you don't get immediate help. You go to Hudson Valley Legal Service and there's somebody on the phone to help you right away, but they don't have enough of them and they need more money. And so I think that the plan for the county is to have that money, in a place where it is accessible, where there's legal help for it right away, where there's follow-up, where there's other support services and things like that. There are a lot of other public-private partnerships to build housing, but they're taking, maybe some will come online next year. Maybe Rupco will be finished with its projects and stuff, but there's a lot that are stalled. And there's not the assurance that those rents will stay stabilized, because a lot of these public-private partnerships say you will have tax relief for X amount of years. You will have X amount of units that are, are for the really poor people
Mhm.
for X amount of years. So I get to have a stable, secure life for 10 years. And then all of a sudden that privilege is out, because the deal to build the apartment complex I moved into only gave 10 to 20 years of stability.
Mhm.
And I think that, when we talk about our communities, housing stability is what stabilizes the communities. And I think, Abby, you alluded to that, as you have too, Katrina and Yolanda.
But you also see what you can't get ahead, because like I was explaining to you earlier, my daughter was homeless forever, finally has a place. She's finally able to work, and DSS cuts her off. Like
Right.
she's making
Right.
thousands of dollars. She has 5 children. How is she supposed to take care of her children, pay the rent and the bills for Central Hudson, and it off of one paycheck?
Mhm.
And it makes no sense. You make 1 cent too much,
Yep.
and DSS shuts you off.
Yep.
Yeah.
I
You
hear that
know,
all the time.
So that's another thing. Like,
And that's where this other program comes into play that did run out of funding, that was administered through HCR, which was specific to homeownership. And I would love to bring that back to the city of Kingston and to Ulster and Northern Dutchess, so that this becomes a generational wealth component, where we can have a family home that can be passed down generation to generation, that's affordable, quality housing, that's getting online quickly. I mean, that's so important. And even if we can get like another $1 million allocated for a program like that could help a lot of families within our community. And again, that generational component of having a home to pass down to your children, to your grandchildren, I think that's so important. I think that needs to be something that we prioritize, and making sure that we're really impacting those most vulnerable communities, making sure that they're prioritized. So I think homeownership needs to be something that's considered a little bit more strongly, especially in an area like where we live, where, it is a good mix of homes and rental units. And then just going back to some of the things that you had mentioned earlier with regard to, giving a phone call to the Attorney General's office and all of this, that's where your state reps come in. Like your state representative, if you get in touch with your assembly person or your senator, they can contact the Attorney General's office on your behalf. They have a specific liaison within these departments and these agencies that are dedicated to government elected officials. And it's important that we're really maximizing our usage of those liaisons and of those resources. And that's where, you know, your rep comes into play to make sure that you're prioritized amongst that long list of individuals that are filing with the Attorney General's office. That is a really important role of state representatives, is to make sure that you're streamlining that process and you're kind of serving as the advocate for this individual when corresponding with these state entities, such as Letitia James's office, who's our AG, or HCR, Homes, Housing and Community Renewal, which is the folks that administer a lot of these different funding programs for, rent initiatives or the ADU initiatives or the homeowner initiatives. So I think it's important that you just have that reliable lifeline within that state representative to really provide that service and serve as your advocate.
Yeah, but that's kind of hard, because we had that kind of faith in the people we're voting for, and then we get slapped in the face. And I say that because we had another young woman on our show who works for the state, became homeless, and couldn't get no help nowhere.
I heard about an individual who works for OPWDD, and the same thing she had experienced as well. And I could not believe that we had an individual who was working for a state entity that was experiencing this type of homelessness and just having issues with affordability overall, which we're all struggling from because prices are just going through the roof across the board within Ulster and Northern Dutchess counties, which is another component entirely with regard to bringing good paying jobs here that, our young people can start in good paying careers right out of high school without having to go to college or pay for workforce development programs. We want to streamline that and make sure that they're provided right off the bat, good paying jobs that they can go into as careers, be proud of that, contribute to our local economy, and actually have an affordable quality of life here.
Yeah, I think that's easy to say, but right now the reality of it is that the average wage in our community is $30,000. That's $16,000 short of what people need to pay rent on a one-bedroom apartment. And the ADUs you're mentioning, and I don't know if the audience knows what an ADU is. It's an auxiliary dwelling unit, and it's under the new zoning in Kingston, which allows people to put convert a garage or put a little house cottage on their property. They started years ago with in-law apartment type situations, and there was always zoning that was against them. So if my kids need to take care of me in the future, they wouldn't be able to add, an apartment on their house. But now we can do that. And there were funds in Kingston. Kingston's goal is to have 1,000 of them built, but they're slow in coming. Their funds have, I think, run out for this year, but they also, with the cost of building, they've gone up. So it's not really an immediate solution. But there was something else that you mentioned that I wanted to pick up on.
Well, speaking of solutions, what are your solutions for affordable housing?
Yeah, absolutely. So I want to build off of the Rent Stabilization and Tenant Protection Act, like I had mentioned earlier, and just make sure that we are providing the resources necessary if other municipalities want to do the vacancy rate studies, which is how you decipher whether or not you can enact a rent stabilization within your municipality. So I think that a lot of our supervisors and mayors are going to be more willing to get on board with something like this if they have the funding resources necessary to do those vacancy rate studies, and it doesn't add increased tax burden on their localities. So I think that providing those resources, making sure that we also have additional funding for building codes and zoning departments. I've heard from a lot of our municipal leaders that they just don't have the staff or the technology to really perform with regard to ADUs or even the short-term rentals that now they have to go and review before approving time and time again. And so I think that it's important, like if we are enacting these laws on a state level to ensure these added protections, if our municipalities don't have the resources to actually roll them out, then it's not working as intended. And so I think it's important that we're providing for those resources. In this past state budget, I would have liked to see more money secured for RUPCO, right? So we have that one project over in Quality Inn they need like over $40 million still to get that completed. And that would be a major solution to address our housing issues here in the city of Kingston and Ulster County specifically. And so if we can get funding for RUPCO, for example, for that project that they have underway over there, I think that's important too. We have the highest number of manufactured homes in Ulster and Dutchess County versus that of the rest of the state. We have to make sure that we're protecting the tenants of manufactured homes, because those developments, they're ripe for developers to come in, buy them out, and tear them all down and put together like mini mansions or really nice expensive condos, because it already has water and septic established. So by protecting those manufactured home tenants with the right of first refusal, where they can join together and buy their property together as those manufactured home tenants before the developer can come in and buy it from them, that's a great way to make sure that those tenants are protected within those manufactured homes, which are some of the most affordable rentals within Ulster County. So that's really important. Like my approach to everything is really from the ground up, like looking specifically at Ulster and Northern Dutchess County, what our housing landscape looks like, what the majority of our issues look like. Even the rural urban makeup of our district needs to be taken into consideration. And then we need to find solutions that are specific to this district, not necessarily the rest of the state, Long Island, New York City, because even within the city of Kingston, the housing solutions here are going to look a lot different than that in the town of Gardner or the town of Olive. So we just want to make sure that we're being very specific and creative with our problem solving here. So, and I think it's important too, when we think about going back to why I decided to run, and like thinking about the type of hard work and collaboration that addressing this housing crisis really requires, you need to make sure that you have open lines of communication with your mayors and your supervisors that represent these different communities. And so recognizing that, there's an absence in that line of communication, that's really bothersome. Recognizing that the RUPCO, which is one of our primary housing services that is government supported within Ulster and Northern Dutchess, having that open line of communication with the leadership over at RUPCO, so you know exactly how you can support their initiatives already underway. That's really important. And that's something that we just don't have right now.
Gosh, I'm sorry. I blanked out again on what I wanted to say. You were going, oh, I know what it was. I'm sorry. Going back to the people on the ground and the people in this community, I think that the other thing that I've observed, and I don't know how big government deals with this, is the fact that we've criminalized homelessness.
Mm-hmm, right.
We've made it impossible. We don't have enough homes. We've made it impossible for people to get enough supported housing. I was at a community care meeting last month, and the people around the table were all RUPCO, Family of Woodstock, the mental health people, all saying we don't have enough housing for people who have substance abuse issues, mental health issues, and stuff like that. And so these are the people often that find themselves on the street, living in their cars. Not always. There are people like Melissa who's working full time and has 2 master's degrees. So she's living in her car and getting treated like a criminal because she's in a parking lot with, trying to get a night's sleep, or someone died here on the park bench. So
do you know how many people I've seen in Kingston on these new beautiful benches that they've put in our town? How many people sleep underneath the bridge in that new little beautiful park?
So how do you
put in town?
So how do you stop them from
How do you stop it?
being arrested and having their tents taken away?
Yeah, I think that all needs to be decriminalized, especially because aren't we part of the problem, government, right now? If we didn't provide these solutions early on, if we were not proactive in our approach here, then we're responsible to an extent. And if that's the case, then we need to make sure that we're taking extra precautions so that these individuals are protected against the inequities that we created, right?
So would you support a state law that says that people are allowed to put a tent on public property if the system isn't providing them with
Absolutely.
housing?
And I mean, I had this argument too when they were trying to take down the tents from the back of the plaza that have been there for a long time. And I was like, well, where are these individuals going to go? If you don't have a shelter to place them in, if you don't have quality housing for long-term solutions here, then what is the expectation? What, just demand that they disappear and then hope for the best? That's unacceptable. And especially when we're also also failing in the mental health arena too. And we know that mental health is at the core of so much of our homelessness. If you're failing in all of these different areas as a state government, then you need to make sure that you're providing the extra protections where you can. You have to compensate for what you've already lost and what you've neglected to provide your constituents. And so I think it's important that, yeah, we're decriminalizing, again, taking every possible step, because it needs to be multi-pronged. You need to be taking a lot of different efforts at once. You need to be working towards numerous solutions because the issue is so tremendous. And so I think that absolutely where we can decriminalize, that needs to be a necessity. But also while working towards these other goals, like a long-term sustainable housing plan, making sure that we're getting increased housing stock here within Ulster and Northern Dutchess, that's going to be streamlined and not take forever to actually construct.
So in terms of constructing new
And then the
housing, how do
mental
you
health
protect the
issue.
people who are at the very, very low end of income from getting enough housing? Because they're only setting aside like 10%, and it's all based on this formula that doesn't work. Would you support laws that changed that took the profiteering out of housing, that made housing less of a commodity and a profit source for landlords?
I would, but I would be weary about how I do that. And so I don't want to make it so that developers aren't coming into our area to actually construct new buildings, because I know that that's going to be a necessity. But how can we offset cost with government funding resources coming in so that we are compensating for that gap there, instead of making the tenant pay for those additional costs, or making the developer pay for the additional costs, or be weary to actually construct within our area? Because I know that new housing stock is going to be a necessity. And what I fear is that if we don't have new developers coming into our area, some of these apartments that we have right now that are selling for like $2,000, $2,500 a month, or going for rent for $2,500 a month. It's not like they're nice apartments. They're old appliances. They are run down. They need upgrades. And the fact that these people can get away with charging so much in rent for a one bedroom that has aged everything in it, that's unacceptable. And so new developers coming in to build these more green and efficient apartments is going to be key in offsetting that and stabilizing the market a bit.
So the Rent Stabilization Act is actually poor in doing anything about that. It's not going to do anything about that.
The existing Rent Stabilization and Tenant Protection Act, I think, is just one approach. I don't think that it's a solve all. I think when increasing housing stock, that's a completely separate initiative that we need to pursue. And so increasing housing stock is going to be workforce housing, affordable housing, senior housing. We need increased housing stock across the board.
Of course we do.
Mhm.
Well,
So-
let me ask a question, because my building was just brought again. I was I was traumatized.
Yeah.
And it was the same agent again, and I went through some emotions and some feelings with her, and I want to apologize to you because it wasn't her fault. But when the building was brought, we were told basically if they have to fix anything, they're gonna raise our rent. I don't feel like that's fair, because you bought the building knowing what condition it was in. So why should we, the tenants, have to pay for your upgrade to your property that you brought knowing what it needed?
Right. No, I agree with that. And I think that there is a provision within I think it's the rent stabilization, not good cause, where it does, oh no, maybe it is good cause, that allows for increases for some improvements up to a certain threshold. It's like 5%. It caps off at 8%, I'm quite certain. And so that's even a high amount, though. That's
Right.
what I'm trying to get at. Is like even these increases that could be considered here and implemented are still high amounts. And so that brings me to another point of what is affordable housing? How do we calculate affordable housing? Here we talk about, we'll build more affordable housing units. But then when people go to apply, they realize, oh, I don't actually qualify for this because I make, like you said, a couple cents more than what's considered affordable housing. So I think that needs to be part of the conversation too, is like, do we need to revise the methodology that's used when calculating affordable housing? Do we need it to be more specific, more niche, so that we're accounting for more factors such as household size, longevity within that city or within that municipality? There's other things that I think need to be accounted for so that we
That
can.
at the state level or the federal level?
The state level, but it could also be set at a municipal level, because some of these things are opt-in at a municipal level where they can have the leverage to implement certain factors. that could also be set by localities, not just the state. But I prefer to do it at a state level, just because then it adds that additional protections almost as a mandate for these municipalities, so that they don't necessarily have that opt-in provision. As long as we know that it's not going to have, again, unintended consequences for these different municipalities, just because of urban-rural makeup, for example, or population count, something like that. But, if we can do that blanket rule on a state level, I think that that's preferred.
How is it real estate developers in New York City corporations funding your campaign?
Yeah, so I'm getting obviously lots of contributions. And I knew I was going to have to fundraise competitively, just looking at the race from 2022. I mean, there was only almost $1 million that came in on my opponent's side. So I knew I was going to have to fundraise competitively. I knew that as a new candidate, it was going to be a struggle for me. And so I've been really transparent from the start about the contributions that I'm accepting. And most of my contributions are from in-district constituents, which is obviously a positive. I think that these developers, though, the real estate agency knows that this is a big time within the market right now. And so recognizing that there's going to be increased housing stock, these are the individuals that develop our housing. These are the individuals within our district that are handling real estate, that are at these community meetings and forums, trying to provide solutions. And so I think it's not necessarily something that, I didn't foresee, is that these folks would be weighing in. I just didn't realize it would be so heavily one-sided. I thought that they would be more looking to just invest in candidates that are looking to develop more housing, and candidates that are looking to act on the housing issues that we're experiencing throughout the district. So I think that I can't really speak to outside the district developers necessarily, because there wouldn't be any type of personal relationship there unless they come and do developments within the district, which is not uncommon. When I was in Orange County, we had a lot of developers that were our typical developers working with RUPCO and HCR that did the mixed income units. And they were based out of like New York City, for example. And then when we look at like Good Cause and the rent stabilization, even those bills originated from New York City. So we know that like real estate and development is really rooted in New York City, within New York State. So I think that it just has to do with the housing crisis that we're facing right now, and how much housing is a priority within New York State, that they are getting so heavily involved within campaigns.
But there are also groups that are really committed to defeating the working party family candidates, the candidates that are really trying to look at the inequality of economics, the inequality in housing. So some of your real estate developer contributors are really working against the things that you say you're for, as well as you have money from what's called the Women Voters Fund, which is specifically targeting working family candidates. So
yeah,
when you say your contributions are local,
well, a majority of my contributions are from in-district
your
constituents.
big
So they
contributions are coming from outside,
Right.
from people who are really working against working party candidates.
Well, I don't think that
Working families.
Yeah, I don't think that's, I think that that's your opinion, to all due respect. But I think that, they're contributing to this campaign because my vote and my positions on these measures will have no influence on any of the contributions I'm getting, and vice versa. And I think that my work with the Rent Stabilization and Tenant Protection Act can speak to that. I think that my work throughout the past 6 years as a chief of staff reflects that I have always put community and constituents first, not stakeholders. And so I think it's a hard argument to actually justify and to make when you're saying, you're saying one thing and these real estate developers are saying another thing. Just because they're not aligned with my policy priorities does not mean that I'm going to act in a certain way, or I'm going to vote in a certain way, or pursue solutions in a certain way.
You may be the only candidate and public servant.
Aren't
Well,
landlords also funding your campaign?
Potentially, yes.
Because that's like a real conflict of interest. I mean, I don't know much about politics, but if I'm for the tenants, but the landlords are backing me, that's
yeah, no, I can understand the concern, but again, campaign finance law takes all of that into account. And so the campaign finance law that has been implemented within the past 5-6 years to really make it more stringent when you're accepting these contributions, making sure that the limit in which you can accept is capped out for individuals. And so I think that, again, by participating in the state matching funds this year, first enacted this year, and just being really transparent from the start with my constituency, I think that that's really important here. And I think that needs to be accounted for. If I have been straight up from the start, and if I recognize that, hey, I have to fundraise competitively, these are my positions on these issues, this is what I'm going to bring to the table, I certainly am going to keep my word. And I don't think that we can always point to the contributions received by a candidate as a reflection of what that candidate is. And if that were the case, then we would look back to 2022 and see who those contributors were to the candidates in the 2022 Assembly election. And then, those are not all positives either. And so, and I would never make the assumption that, that those contributions necessarily equate to my opponent's position on certain bills, because I just wouldn't want to make that assumption without having more justification to back it up. And so I think just, the same should be applicable to me as a first-time candidate as well.
Oh, that's why we got you here.
I
Because,
appreciate it.
like I said, for us that don't know, it's scary
Mhm.
because to know that, okay, the real estate people, the landlords, we're the impacted people here. We're the ones that's trusting in you to do the right thing by us. But it's like, okay, is she really going to do it, or is she going to do like everybody else
I
said?
think, yeah.
Because these are the people that's holding her down. So is her loyalty to them, or is her loyalty to us? So again, we just need to know, because we don't know.
Mhm.
But the game is that lobbyists back candidates that they feel that their point of view will have an impact on. So $15,000 is, from a PAC is significant money in a race, or $32,000 or whatever it is. So I think, it's a legitimate concern.
Mhm.
And it's a legitimate concern when a candidate doesn't take a pledge that says, I'm not going to take money from landlords because I'm really about housing.
Right.
I appreciate that you're a new candidate, and
Mhm.
I certainly appreciate the fact that at such a young age you're running and you're interested in the community. And I hope if you don't win, that you will in fact get involved in the community. I'm a little concerned that you couldn't rattle off, 10 great organizations that you have in your head that you want to get involved with. So I hope that after leaving here, you will, think
I
hard
can name
about that.
10 organizations I would love to get involved with. I mean, and that's what I'm talking about, is when we speak to, recognizing right now that, coming to the table, and I wish I brought like the 2022 campaign contributions listed out for my opponent, so that I could point to those and say that I would never make that assumption as you're making right now, because that's just not something I would
I've
do,
looked at it and it's clean.
Okay, well, I think that other people would probably disagree. And so I think that, that's one component to this conversation. But when we're talking about housing solutions here, we need more housing stock, right? And these are the individuals that build more housing stock. What is the incumbent doing to ensure that we're building more housing stock right now?
Well, I think that the incumbent is also very aware of what's happening in Ulster County, and with the boots on the ground here to do that. I think that her social housing proposal, which I know that you agree with, is a tremendous thing to change the commodification of housing in our state. Yes, it's a long-term project. It's for those who don't know,
Right.
it's
I
to
was about to say,
provide,
what is that?
yeah, it's to provide a government level oversight organization such as we have for the Utilities Commission, although we might think it's not functioning very well. But it really is to provide housing where the tenants have a say in the housing. It's funded through the government, through whatever bonding and whatever, resources that they have, but it's to build social housing that always stays in the hands of the tenants, that always stays low income. And that's the problem we're having now with the privatization of our housing authority in Kingston.
Right.
We don't know what the future is going to be. But
Exactly.
social housing, the future is stable. People go in at a certain level because they can afford that rent, and they don't get punished if they get a better job and earn more money. Right now in public housing,
Oh,
you have to pay 25 to 30% of your
Right.
income, no matter how much. So when you talk about wanting home ownership in this community and people to be able to pass on homes, people in public housing will never get there because they're going to get punished every time they get more money. Their rent's going to go up. They'll never be able to set aside savings to have their own place. Never, ever, ever. Social housing ensures that You don't get your income reviewed every year to see whether you earn more money. You get to keep the money you earn. You as a tenant have a tenant organization that hires the property management people and could fire the property management people.
Oh, I
Which
like
right
that.
now tenants are
Social
victimized
housing.
by property managers when they're in those bigger things.
Right.
So, I mean, there are lots of other components and it's very detailed, but it's a really, when you talk about solutions, the solution to our housing problem, especially for the very low income and poor, is to have social housing, is to decommodify it, to get, yes, partner with developers if they're willing to partner, but make sure that the control of how those houses are run and giving the tenants the power and the ownership, it's
Right.
huge.
My only worry is that the timeline of that. And so that's why when I said, what is the incumbent doing right now to
That's what she
increase
said.
housing stock? It seems, is there anything underway right now to increase the housing stock
Well,
that
I think one way
developers?
you increase housing stock is to stop evicting people, because when you evict people, you have more homeless people. So that's one thing that's really, that's why the good cause eviction and the Tenants Protection Act are so important. And I,
And when you got homeless,
I don't
you
work for a
got
campaign, so
hungry,
I don't know the rest of it.
and like the other day I came out here with 10 dinners to feed the homeless. And
They were so appreciative
so
too.
I mean, like, it was mind-boggling that they were like, the one guy was like, oh my God, I haven't had a home cooked meal in forever,
Mhm.
and that's sad because that's the part of it too. You're homeless, you're hungry, you're miserable, you can't take showers, you can't change your clothes. It's just so much involved with being homeless. And then you have a warming center in the winter that don't take kids.
Right.
Like, make that make sense. I had a young lady cry to me because she went there with her child and they told her, we will not accept you here. So she slept in her car with her child and then got harassed by the police,
Mhm.
And then he was talking about generations. And I just have to say, generations are not going to continue to strive here if nothing's done. Because unfortunately, my mother, who lived in her apartment for 20 plus years, me and my daughter, 3 generations, homeless at the same time. My daughter is born here. My grandkids are born here. Rents are paid. They wouldn't even take the rent from my mother when they brought her building. They just wanted everybody gone. And the building's still sitting there empty
Mhm.
right now, empty for over a year.
Mhm.
So what was the purpose of the judge at that time going against the ETPA and allowing the LLC to come in and make 7 families? It was a 7-unit home, 7 families homeless.
No, I agree. I agree. And maybe that could be a new piece of state legislation that says, hey, if you're going to evict tenants of a building for the purpose of renovating that building and getting it back online as a new rental unit or as a new listing, then you have to do so within a certain time frame or else you're not going to get approved for it. Right. And or ensure that there is enough notice given to these tenants and that there's other viable solutions provided. But I think that there's a lot, even in what you just mentioned, that should be taken into account when we're talking about these solutions that we're bringing to the table. Why do we only have a warming shelter during the winter? Why don't we have a solid shelter here that is year round, that has quality services and is safe for women, children, and families as a whole? Like, that's a problem that
Because
I
we don't
see.
have the
And
funding
again,
for it.
Right.
why not?
I don't know.
That should be the next
That's
thing, like a
right.
walk-in shelter. Because in Albany and New York, you don't have to go through DSS and that. You could just walk in, I'm homeless, I'm cold. They take your name, your ID, whatever, and they give you a bed
And
for the
yeah,
night.
yeah,
It might not be for the week,
right.
but it's for the night.
Well, we tried to
You
get
know.
Kingston Hospital to take its empty building and use it for emergency housing, remember? And they didn't want to talk housing.
There's a
It's-
whole lot of buildings around here that they
Yeah.
could do, but they
Yeah.
don't want to do nothing with it, and I'm still trying to figure that out. But
This has been a really, really good show. I'm glad that you came on and to share with us what your intentions are.
Yeah,
I
absolutely.
very much appreciate it. And thank you, Donna, for coming
Oh,
in and
you're welcome.
sharing your.
I just have one more question for Donna,
Huh?
real quick,
Okay.
because They said Sarah Hannah is supported by the workingpeoples.org.
Working
Do you
families,
do
the
you know
Working
what that is?
Families Party we have, unlike a lot of other states, we have a lot of different parties, lines that people can run on.
Mhm.
So Gabby's, as an independent person, is running under the Democratic primary.
Okay.
As a
Not endorsed
Democrat.
by,
I'm a
yeah, as a,
Democrat, yeah.
yeah, I'm
Right.
sorry.
No, it's
yes.
okay.
And so Sarah Hannah has the endorsement of the Ulster County Democrats, but she's running with the Working Party's endorsement as well. So she's got, she's on the Democratic primary, but she's also a working part. So you'll see some candidates, it'll have their names multiple times on a ballot because there's more than one party that can endorse them. And the Working Party's primary thing is, they split from the Democrats in a sense because the Democrats have not changed things for working families as much. Is their sort of thing, is this the best you think we can do? So
Okay.
they look for candidates who do not go with the normal, what's been going on in government and how it's been going on, and really look for truly progressive thinkers that want to change the narrative of how things are done here.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Because see, like I said, I don't know much about politics,
Yeah.
but what I do know is when we vote, we trust that y'all are gonna do what you say you're gonna do, that you're gonna take our lives into considerations, our families into consideration. And like Wanda, I'm grateful that you came in and let us know who you are. Thank you for running.
Absolutely.
I wish you both, you and Sarah Hannah, the best of luck in the election. And if you are voted in, you gonna come back and talk to
Heck
us?
yeah, I'm gonna come back and talk to you, and I'm gonna have a lot of great tangible solutions that you're gonna be proud of. I can assure you that. So thank you for having me, though. I really do appreciate it. It
Yeah.
feels great to be here.
Thank you.
Thank
And Donna,
you. Thanks. Donna.
greatly appreciate
Oh,
you
it's
and all
fun.
the work that you do.
Well, I do the work because of being with you and Yolanda on the streets in the city and talking to real people. And you have really added so much to my life. And Gabby, I really enjoyed meeting you. I expect you'll be involved in this community going forward in whatever way. That's exciting. Thank you both.
I'm Yolanda.
And I'm Katrina, coming straight from the streets.